Luxury isn't a lifestyle, it's a countdown. In 1903, the Romanovs threw a party that became their funeral. They owned 1/6 of the world but were its biggest debtors. They wore diamonds to hide hunger and danced to drown out a ticking bomb. From the Winter Palace to a Siberian basement, this is how status becomes a noose. Welcome to Luxury Historian, where luxury, status symbols, and power set the rules, but every shine hides a cost. In February 1903, the Romanovs didn't just throw a party, they built a time machine. The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg was transformed into a hallucination of the 17th century. This was the costume ball of 1903, the most expensive social event in the history of the Russian Empire. The Empress Alexandra Fyodorovna demanded that every guest dress in the style of the pre-Petrine era. It was a masterpiece of conspicuous consumption. Nicholas II wore the original robe of Tsar Alexis, heavy with gold thread. Alexandra's dress was a fortress of diamonds and emeralds, some of which were literally stolen from the state treasury for the night. The cost was staggering. A single officer's costume could cost as much as a luxury apartment in the center of the capital. The total bill for the flowers alone, brought by special heated trains from the French Riviera, would have fed a village for a decade. But the real cost wasn't measured in rubles. It is measured in the deep cognitive dissonance of the elite. Inside the palace, the air smelled of amber and expensive perfumes. Outside, across the frozen Neva, the air smelled of soot and the silent rage of bread lines. Nicholas looked at his reflection in the legendary Orlov diamond, fixed on the imperial scepter. He saw a divine ruler of a glorious past. He failed to see that he was looking into the eye of a storm. The ball was a brilliant performance of a world that was already dead, but refused to lie down. It was the last waltz of the Romanovs, danced on the thin ice of a frozen ocean. As the music faded, the guests didn't know that the floor beneath them was already vibrating. The echo of the 1903 ball would soon be replaced by the screams of a tragedy that had started years before in the mud of a place called Khodynka. The luxury of the Romanovs was born in a field of mud and blood. May 1896. Nicholas II is being crowned. To celebrate, he offers a gift to his people. A souvenir enamel cup, and a piece of sausage. Thousands of peasants gathered at Khodynka Field. A rumor spread that there wasn't enough for everyone. The crowd surged. In minutes, 1,300 people were crushed to death in the ditches. While the carts were being loaded with bodies, the emperor faced a choice. His ministers advised him to cancel the celebrations, but the French ambassador was hosting a ball that night. This is the first appearance of the empathy gap. Nicholas decided to attend. He believed that his presence at the ball was a diplomatic necessity, more important than a public mourning for his subjects. In a private tent near the field of death, the emperor sipped champagne. He was only a mile away from the mass graves. This detachment wasn't cruelty, it was a psychological shield that would eventually blind him to the coming revolution. The people of Russia never forgot that night. They saw a Tsar who preferred the glitter of French diamonds to the tears of Russian mothers. The nickname Bloody Nicholas was written in the mud of Khodynka. The Khodynka shadow would stretch across his entire reign. To maintain the illusion of a stable empire, Nicholas needed a financial genius to hide the growing debt. He found him in a man who would build a Golden Mirage for the world to see. To keep the Romanov machine running, Nicholas II needed more than just bloodline. He needed a mountain of gold. Enter Sergei Witte, the financial mastermind who decided to turn the Russian Empire into a global brand. In 1897, Witte introduced the gold standard. Suddenly, the ruble was as solid as the British pound. But this was the gold standard fallacy. Russia looked rich, but its gold was actually a loan from the banks of Paris. This was the birth of a massive sovereign debt bubble. To build the Trans-Siberian Railway and maintain the world's most luxurious court, Russia became the world's largest debtor. Every ball in the Winter Palace was indirectly paid for by French shopkeepers and teachers. The sound of the empire was a lie. Listen closely. The rhythmic thump-thump of the printing presses creating paper rubles, and the sharp clink of gold coins. But look through the metal and you see only IOUs written in elegant cursive. Witte created a golden mirage. He convinced the world that Russia was a growing industrial giant, while it was actually a luxury colony of the West. The status was real, but the capital was borrowed. While Witte managed the debt, the Tsar managed the sparkle. As long as the French credit flowed, the Romanovs could afford to ignore reality and retreat into a world of mechanical perfection, a world created by a man named Peter Carl Fabergé. While Witte was balancing the books, Nicholas II was balancing an illusion. Every Easter, the emperor awaited a tiny miracle made of enamel and gold. This was the era of Fabergé, the man who turned imperial guilt into mechanical luxury. For Nicholas, these eggs were more than gifts. They were a form of status anxiety. In a world where his authority was being questioned by strikes and losing wars, the perfection of a Fabergé mechanism proved his legitimacy. If the egg worked perfectly, the empire was still fine. The year is 1905. Russia's fleet is at the bottom of the Pacific after the disaster at Tsushima. The country is in flames, yet the imperial order for the colonnade egg is delivered on time. It was a masterpiece of detachment, using beauty to drown out the screams of a dying navy. Listen to the heartbeat of the Romanovs. It's not human, it's mechanical. Tick, tick, tick. Each diamond-encrusted wheel turns with cold precision. But this isn't a toy, it's a time bomb. The luxury was the anesthesia, but the patient was already terminal. Fabergé provided the perfect distraction. But even the finest enamel could not hide the cracks in the walls of the Romanovs' home. To understand why the Tsar couldn't hear the revolution, we must enter his echo chamber of marble, the Winter Palace. The Winter Palace was not a home. It was a fortress made of malachite and gold. With over 1,500 rooms and miles of corridors, it was a city within a city, designed to make the individual feel invisible. This was the physical manifestation of social stratification. The marble walls weren't just for beauty, they were a sound-proof barrier. Inside, the only sounds were the rustle of silk and the soft click of guards' boots. The screams of the street could not penetrate the 3-foot-thick stone. Nicholas and Alexandra lived in a besieged fortress. To them, the palace was a sterile laboratory where they could pretend the 20th century didn't exist. They replaced the us versus them reality with a dream of an eternal, obedient Russia that existed only in their prayer books. The air of the palace was the ultimate luxury. It was filtered, scented, and silent. There's a story that Empress Alexandra once nearly fainted, not from fear, but from the literal smell of the crowd during a rare public appearance. To her, the Russian people weren't citizens. They were a biological threat, a cloud of dust and sweat that threatened her marble world. This sterile barrier was her shield, but it also became her coffin. The more she wrapped herself in silk to drown out the stress, the more she fell into the trap of compulsive consumption. She didn't just want luxury, she needed it to survive the fear of the future. If the Winter Palace was a fortress, the Mauve Boudoir was the bunker. Alexandra Fyodorovna created a world of compulsive consumption to drown out the terrifying silence of a fragile nursery. Every inch of her private space was covered in the finest French silks and thousands of fresh flowers. But this beauty was a narcotic. She was hiding from the blood curse, the hemophilia she had passed to her son, Alexei. To the Empress, luxury was the only thing she could control. She obsessed over the placement of every chair and the shade of every ribbon because she could not control the blood inside her son's veins. This was her psychological armor against a world that hated her. The silk was a shroud. Look closely at the delicate lace on her sleeves. It feels light, but it is heavy with the fear of a single bruise that might never stop bleeding. Every diamond necklace, every gold icon, was a desperate bribe to God, a plea for a miracle through mysticism and excess. But as the Empress retreated into her scented world, the empire's credit was running dry. The Romanovs were no longer spending their own wealth. They were dancing on a financial time bomb funded by the banks of Paris. The Romanovs weren't just spending their own gold, They were spending the future of France. By 1910, Russia had become the world's largest borrower, and Paris was its primary vault. This was the ultimate geopolitical leverage. France didn't lend billions for profit. They bought a sword. Every golden ruble sent to St. Petersburg was a down payment on a Russian soldier who would eventually die for French interests. Russia became a luxury colony. The capital flowed into the country as loans, only to flow right back out to the French Riviera. The Romanov elite treated France as their playground, spending borrowed millions on estates they would only visit for a month a year. Look at the two worlds the credit built. In Nice, a marble villa glows under the Mediterranean sun, filled with Russian icons and French champagne, the height of elegance. Now, look 1,500 miles east, a peasant hut in Ryazan, half buried in the gray mud, where the only luxury is a piece of dry bread and a prayer. The villa was built on the debt that the peasants' children would have to pay in blood. The Romanovs were buying time, but the interest rate was rising. In 1914, the bill finally came due. The luxury colony was about to be dragged into a war that would turn their diamond necklaces into a noose. In August 1914, the music should have stopped, but the Romanovs simply turned it up to drown out the sound of the cannons. The empire entered the Great War carrying the massive weight of opportunity cost. Every ruble spent on the 1903 ball, every diamond on a Fabergé egg, was a heavy artillery shell that didn't exist. The Gilded winter had consumed the army's modernization budget. While the German Krupp factories were churning out steel, the Russian court was churning out lace. The Empress tried to bridge the gap with patriotic charity. Alexandra and her daughters became Sisters of Mercy. It was a sincere gesture, but it was a paradox of charity on blood. Look at the reflection in the surgical basin. The Empress is bandaging a dying soldier, but in her ears she still wears diamond studs that could have paid for an entire field hospital. To the soldier, she wasn't a mother, she was a ghost from a world that had sent him to die in the mud without boots. The diamonds didn't shine anymore, they blinded. As the war dragged on, the Romanovs tried to sell family jewels to buy weapons, but it was too late. Luxury is not liquid in a crisis. The market for excess had collapsed, and the diamond noose was now tightening around the neck of the monarchy. Luxury is a spell that only works if everyone believes the palace is sacred. But by 1916, a dark shadow had breached the walls, signaling the ultimate institutional decay. Grigory Rasputin didn't wear silk or diamonds. He was a peasant who smelled of the earth and cheap wine. His presence in the Tsar's private rooms was a biological insult to the centuries-old hierarchy of the Russian court. For the aristocracy, luxury had always been the proof of their superiority. But when the Empress allowed this holy man to touch her hand and influence the state, the glitter lost its power. Respect turned into nausea. The silk didn't look like status anymore. It looked like a shroud for a dying mind. Look at the trail he leaves behind. Rasputin walks across the white ballroom, his heavy, mud-caked boots sinking into the priceless hand-woven silk carpets. Each step leaves a black, oily stain on the cream-colored fabric. It was the visual proof that the sterile barrier of the Romanovs had been punctured. The rot wasn't coming from the streets anymore. It was already sitting at the Tsar's table. The nobility stopped defending the throne, not because they wanted a republic, but because they couldn't stand the smell of the palace. The ROT in the silk was the final signal to the world. The Romanovs had lost their divine right to lead, leaving only the bill for the party to be settled. In February 1917, the bill for 1,000 years of status finally arrived, but the Tsar had no more gold left to pay it. The collapse was a black swan event, a sudden, violent reality that the elite thought could never happen in their world of stone and silk. Nicholas II, the man who owned 1/6 of the earth, signed his abdication on a cold train carriage near Pskov. He didn't use a golden fountain pen or a jeweled seal, he used a simple pencil. The greatest empire on earth evaporated in 3 days, signed away with lead and wood. While the empire was dying in a train car, the rituals of the Romanov Versailles survived for one final hour in Tsarskoye Selo. A butler, trained in the absolute precision of the imperial court, entered the dining room of the Alexander Palace. He is a ghost of a system that has already failed. The table was set for 12. The porcelain was Meissen, the crystal was Baccarat, and the silver was polished to a blinding shine. He placed the napkins with geometric perfection, waiting for an emperor who would never come home. The ritual remained, but the power had vanished. The luxury was now just a collection of expensive junk in an empty house. The Gilded Winter was over. The party had ended, and the lights were going out across Russia. But the Romanovs had one final vault left, not a bank in Paris, but the very clothes on their backs. In the dark, claustrophobic rooms of the Ipatiev house, the Romanovs made their final, desperate investment. They no longer had a throne, a navy, or a bank account in Paris. All they had left were the stones they could carry. They spent their final days in a fever of needlework. The Empress and her daughters sewed the remnants of the imperial treasury, pearls, rubies, and massive diamonds, directly into the lining of their corsets and undergarments. They believed this hidden wealth would buy their way to freedom in England or France. This was the ultimate sunk cost fallacy. Even at the edge of the abyss, they refused to let go of the symbols of their status. They continued to invest their hope in the very things that had already destroyed their country. They thought the gold was their shield. They were wrong. July 17, 1918. The basement. When the executioners opened fire in the smoke-filled room, something impossible happened. The bullets didn't penetrate the girls' bodies. They sparked. They ricocheted. The diamond-lined corsets had become accidental body armor, turning a quick execution into a 20-minute nightmare. This was the most terrifying irony of the Gilded Winter. The luxury that was meant to save them only prolonged their agony. The weight of their past prevented a quick death. The diamonds didn't buy freedom. They paid for every extra second of pain in that basement. The bill was finally settled in full. The Romanovs are gone, but their ghosts still haunt our modern vaults. To see how the cycle of status and debt repeats in our own world, we must look at the mirror they left behind. The Romanovs are not a ghost story from the past. They are a mirror of our present. The Gilded Winter didn't end in a Siberian basement. It just changed its currency. Today, we don't use French state loans to fund our illusions. We use credit cards and digital debt. We still chase status symbols to hide our own status anxiety, building personal Versailles on Instagram, while our bank accounts are as hollow as a looted tomb. The income inequality gap in 1917 was a canyon that no amount of gold leaf could fill. Today, that gap is widening again. We live in a world of digital czars and financial serfs, where the glitter of the top 1% blinds the rest to the fragility of the entire system. We are still dancing on the thin ice of a frozen ocean, ignoring the cracks beneath our feet. The flame is dying. Look at the single candle burning in the dark. As the light fades, the modern city outside the window remains vibrant and loud. But history warns us, the louder the party, the closer the collapse. The Romanovs thought their winter would be gilded forever. They forgot that spring always arrives with a flood. Status is a beautiful lie, but reality always checks the bill. If you want to see the fine print of history before the lights go out again, subscribe, because the next Gilded Winter might be closer than you think. The Romanovs were not the first to turn gold into a cage. Centuries before, Louis XIV built the original velvet noose at Versailles. To see where this golden trap began, watch the next video.